You have me right where you want, Ogidei Khan. After all of my unheard prayers, I now find myself kneeling before your bow. I should feel lucky to have survived this long, but the only thoughts that still cross my mind are of what could have been before the dreams of my kingdom were silenced by a rampage of butchery. It is cruel that you now ask me to humor you with a tale so captivating that you cannot loose your arrows into our chests. But for my own sake, and that of my advisors, I, Queen Rusudan of Georgia, will try. You Mongols look at my lavish garment and assume that we Georgians have never known hardship. But in truth, we come from beginnings as humble as any warlord without a battle to his name. Our kingdom sits at a crossroads between worlds, the Byzantine West and the Persianate East. For generations, we lived in the war-torn shadows of empires, competing on all sides of the mountains surrounding us. Under the leadership of my mother Tamar, however, Georgia would finally become an empire in its own right. Initially, Tamar was merely co-regent to her father, who hoped to ready his only child for when she inherited the throne. Turning to her great-grandfather David the Builder for inspiration, the young heir applied herself to the task, acquainting herself with every tedious detail that comes with ruling a kingdom. Yet, when her father died, she found herself cast into a political game for which nothing could have prepared her. Reeling from her father's authoritative reign, the Aznauri noblemen in her court deprived her of her powers before she could wield them. To achieve their ends, they forced her to marry a deposed Russian prince named Yury, who vowed to keep her in check while the Aznauris continued to dilute the crown's authority. Facing resistance at every turn, Tamar had no choice but to travel to Armenia. There, she would seek the help of her only allies in the court, the brothers Zakarian. Raised by the Cumans following his father's murder, Yury was skilled in combat and a shrewd judge of character. It was not long before he earned the respect of the masses. The one person who vehemently disapproved of Yury was Tamar herself, whose dysfunctional marriage left her in constant misery. When finally afforded the chance, she insisted that they be divorced. It was an unprecedented move for the already unprecedented queen, but for once, she had her way, and she knew exactly who should replace Yury. From a young age, Tamar's eyes had been for David Soslan, an Alanian prince who had frequented her palace ever since her aunt began looking after him. Tall in stature and built like a fortress, my father was the fancy of every maiden in Georgia. Most importantly, however, he respected Tamar in a way Yury never had, preferring to submit to her orders rather than give his own. After so many setbacks, and with her former husband now exiled to Constantinople, the young queen could at last envision a future where she would take the lead. Opportunists lurk in the shadows of victory. Just as your father contended with a vengeful Kushluk, my mother now faced the wrath of those blindsided by Yury's ousting. One evening, Tamar invited the Aznauris to dinner, only to notice that her drink was not quite the usual color. When she caught the smug look on her guests' faces, she knew exactly who was at fault. Her suspicions were soon confirmed when Yury returned from exile and seized the stronghold of Gori. Hungry to overthrow the woman who had disgraced him, the deposed leader now spearheaded a resistance of vengeful Aznauris and new followers who he had met while in exile. Having only recently seized power, Tamar now had to hold it. In a tense showdown, the two former partners would decide their future, or lack thereof. When Tamar's guards brought Yury before the queen, everyone in the room held their breath as she contemplated the fate of the man who had just brought her kingdom to the brink of collapse. As vengeful stares surrounded him, the once dauntless spirit suddenly broke down and burst into tears. Much like myself, Yury looked into the face of death. But in that moment, something unexpected came over my mother, and she ordered her executioner to freeze his weapon before it could land. This act of mercy appalled many, yet Tamar stood firm. Such a ruthless demonstration, she said, was unworthy of a man who had battled her so valiantly, especially when only a stroke of luck had kept her from the same fate. Yury was blessed with another chance. I can only pray that I am offered the same. Evidently my story has not impressed you, and still you ask me for more. Perhaps you would not be teasing me with my advisor's corpse if I had chosen my words more carefully. Then again, regret was all but routine for my mother, whose responsibilities only continued to grow with time. If not for her new husband's support, she would have struggled to adapt to her newfound freedom. It was not long before the confidence that David installed in her proved crucial. The ruler of Shirvan, a Georgian protectorate, pled for her aid in his struggle for the city of Shamkor, which had just fallen to a Turkmen army. Though largely unacquainted with her Muslim vassal, Tamar knew that there was little time for detailed planning. She would need to act decisively while she still had an ally left to protect. You may consider Tamar foolish for continually sparing her ungrateful former husband, but this steadfast kindness was her greatest quality. Despite suffering one betrayal after another, the queen remained remarkably composed. Many who once sought her demise now admired her integrity. Yury, by contrast, now struck his former supporters as a desperate and delusional renegade. With his guise of righteousness shattered, all that remained was his vanity. Few mourned when he died in a Tbilisi monastery. Tamar, meanwhile, only grew more popular as she expanded her kingdom, for the queen treated her foreign subjects with dignity rather than as lowly tributaries. Whenever the Turkmens attacked, the people of Shirvan could always count on the queen's protection. Ruthlessness can be a powerful tool, but greater still is the strength to put it aside. Although peace reigned for a time, Tamar's recent victories had drawn the Rome Sultanate's ire. With war imminent, my mother thought back to David the Builder's defining moment. The Battle of Didgori was a watershed victory for Georgia, one which permanently established it as a force to be reckoned with. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered by the long invincible Seljuk forces, Tamar's great-grandfather led his hardy Monaspas in a decisive shock charge, one which even the victors of Manzikert could not withstand. Despite this, the Seljuks were only beaten, not vanquished. Now the haughty Sultan of Ram was eager to finally undo Didgori. He gleefully sent an emissary to Tamar, proposing that this feeble-minded woman marry him, or else be reduced to one of his concubines. When the ambassador delivered the letter to Tamar's court, an enraged Zakaria smacked the emissary in the face, sending him to the floor. Undeterred by the Sultan's insults, the queen wished to resolve the matter peacefully. But more pressing matters pulled her in another direction. Over the prior century, Armenia had fallen on hard times. Its key cities were now held by the Shaddadis, whose yoke the Zakarian brothers were eager to overthrow. Liberating Armenia would gain Tamar and her husband a valuable ally in the inevitable conflict against the Seljuks. With the fate of Georgia once again at stake, the queen would finally follow in her great-grandfather's footsteps. Tamar's victory over the Seljuks earned Georgia immense prestige. Like David the Builder before her, she wasted no time in making the most of it. Tamar promoted educational reform and built new churches and hospitals throughout her ever-expanding domains. She worked tirelessly to improve the lives of the common people, whom the Aznauris had long ignored. From the humble soldier to the eloquent poet, Tamar cherished every loyal follower who had contributed to her success. She transformed Georgia from a small backwater kingdom into a flourishing empire, whose influence stretched from the shores of the Caspian Sea to the highlands of Anatolia. Truly, it was an inspiring time to grow up. In my youth, I never could have foreseen that this realm would one day be laid waste. Yet, as my mother knew all too well, even the happiest of moments can swiftly be soured. One night, an advisor arrived with a message that would forever haunt her. Your husband is dead. I was too distant from my father to be moved by his passing. But now, as I stare at the ghostly remains of my capital, I finally understand what my mother felt on that dreadful night. Even before the word spread, it was obvious that something had changed in the queen. Only seldom would she show her face in public, and when she did, her manner was terse and indifferent. Misfortune followed swiftly. The resurgent Turkmens devastated Zakaria's capital, Ivani, while Ivane was briefly imprisoned during one of his campaigns. Without David to soothe her, the widowed queen took to eating to cope with the stress. Doubt gnawed at her. Had she truly been this weak all along? Up until then, my mother had prevailed over sultans, emirs, and her own husband. Desperate to convince herself of something greater, she set her sight on a foe like none she had ever crossed. The Khwarazm Shah, I assume, needs little introduction. Your armies have become quite familiar with his former domains by now. By challenging her most dangerous neighbor, Tamar put all of Georgia at risk. As her health took a turn for the worse, she knew that the next day was no guarantee. Before her time came, she would embark on one final test of her abilities. Only I remain now. What few words I have left to say may be my very last. No matter what follows, you shall know the whole truth. Have I finally evoked something in you? Is it your respect for my mother's victory against the Shah, the man whose defeat was the crowning jewel of your father's achievements, that makes you spare my life? Is that why you offer me the bow that moments ago was to kill me? For all the atrocities that you have wrought, it would be perverse of me to accept it. And yet, I will. My mother brought Georgia to heights previously unthinkable. She contended with the greats of her time and bested them all. She left behind a magnificent legacy. But for all my efforts, I have failed to preserve it. I'm not worthy of Tamar the Great, nor have I ever been. If submitting to your rule will save what is left of our kingdom, then I will accept your friendship. In return, I plead only that you accept this. Inscribed is a story of valor, adversity, and companionship. The Knight in the Panther's skin is a tale inspired by my mother's life, one which raises our spirits to this day. When generations have passed, these stories will be all that we leave behind. Your father may well be renowned as the greatest conqueror of all time, whilst my mother becomes just another one of history's forgotten. However the next 1,000 years look back on us, may our fates be bound evermore.